and welcome to our Farmed Animal Conference E-Summit. I am surrounded by many of the hundreds of animals that call Animal Place home. And this is a good time for me to remind all you folks that when you purchase the Summit Packet, which allows you to listen to all the talks, unlimited access to all the talks, that you are supporting all these critters here. Our next guest, I consider one of my heroes, Philip Wollen. He stunned the world when he stepped down as vice president of Citibank, and he vowed to give away his entire fortune. He has worked with many organizations trying to encourage more collaboration. There are causes way too many for me to list here. But I assure you, you're going to thoroughly enjoy this interview with Philip Wollen.
Welcome to the Farmed Animal Conference E-Summit. I'm your host, Ronnie Tsunami Gandiza, the CEO of the Plant-Based Network. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Philip Wollen. Philip is a humanitarian, philanthropist, animal and earth rights activist who has received countless awards for his work, including the Medal of the Order of Australia, Australian of the Year in Victoria, the Albert Schweitzer Award, and is an honorary fellow of the Oxford Center of Animal Ethics. The former vice president of Citibank now heads the Winsome Constance Kindness, an organization that supports and nurtures social change groups with financial grants and capacity building. In honoring him, the National Australia Day Council said, quote, "Through his kindness and generosity, Philip Wollen brings crucial help to many charitable causes and inspires others to share his humanitarian values and ideals. Philip promotes kindness towards all other living beings and strives to enshrine this as a recognizable trait in the Australian character and culture. The measure of his support can be seen in the extraordinary list of organizations the Winsome Constance Kindness supports, benefiting children, animals, the ill, the environment, and aspiring youth. Essentially a private man, he seeks no personal publicity, but is not afraid to step into the limelight for a just cause. And we are absolutely honored to have him and recognize him as a true change maker. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you for having me, and particularly for that most gracious introduction. My mom would be so happy to hear that.
Well, as I mentioned, you're highly recognized for just amazing works in helping organizations to continue in changing the world, right, for the better. And you and I were talking a bit earlier about that. We'll get into that. But before we jump in to how we change the world, what actually got you interested? What first motivated you to go vegan? What was your wake-up call?
Well, Ron, as you know, I used to be an investment banker. And as a consequence, I had a wide range of clients that I would advise and raise capital for, which was my job. And one of my mandates was to go out and see a client who was an industrialist and a conglomerate. So he had interests in many different industries. So I went around to visit all of them, but one of them turned out to be a slaughterhouse. Now, at that time, my favorite food was filet mignon and lobster, a fact for which I am so profoundly ashamed today. Well, I did go down to see this slaughterhouse operation, and what I saw that day absolutely terrified me. It affected me profoundly. I became a vegetarian on the spot. But I didn't know enough about the dairy industry at all. My idea of dairy was to see cows and calves on the banks of a river, of a stream, on hills with green grass, a bucolic vision of Wordsworth and Shelley and Tennyson. But I was on a business trip to India, and I was walking down the street one day, and I saw a dairyman dragging his injured cow to the slaughterhouse gates. The cow had been hit by a lorry and had broken her spine, and she was in agony. And beside her walked her starving, scrawny little calf. Now, to get her to move, he was throwing chili powder into her eyes and shoving sharp objects up her anus. And when he got to the gates of the slaughterhouse, before he handed her over to the butcher, the bastard milked her. So even at her last moment in her life, she was still being abused. Now, if that doesn't change the heart of a man, nothing would. Well, I came home to Australia and I decided to study the dairy industry, and I concluded that it is the filthiest, nastiest, most egregious form of cruelty in animal agriculture. An utter gulag of despair. So I decided I would make a very important decision. I used to be a very ambitious young man, but then decided, I think it was Burford's book, that in the first half of your life, you should try to be successful, but in the second half of your life, you should try to be significant. And I'd hit the second half of my life, and I decided to quit my investment banking and take all the money I'd made and give it away with warm hands and die broke. And so far, I've got to tell you, we're right on budget. So today we support about 500 projects in about 40 countries for children, animals, the environment, and the terminally ill, largely. And we build things for them like hospitals, clinics, shelters, sanctuaries, biogas plants, kindness farms. We take care of the oceans through our great friends, Sea Shepherd and others. And we take care of animals in the streets. We're trying to get people off the meat and dairy drug, the most preposterous form of sustaining a human being is to eat an animal. It's the most expensive, the most economically disastrous way of feeding the world, and supported only by Mad Hatter economics. So essentially, that's what I have to do. And nowadays, I used to do about 150 speeches a year, but for a whole lot of reasons, personal ones, but also COVID. I'm doing only about 40 a year, and all of them are on Zoom. I'm basically pointing out in my circles and elsewhere that the animal industrial complex, a term I coined in 2000, is actually a criminal cartel. And if they had to pay for their externalities, they would go broke. The only reason they aren't broke is because governments allow them to get away with it, and so do the consumers who are picking up the tab. And their rap sheet is absolutely horrendous. Well, you know, with greenhouse gases, for example, zoonotic diseases coming down the pike at us, deforestation, ocean acidification, the profligate wastage of water, the damage done to human health. And of course, it's busting our economies, and our healthcare budgets are unsustainable. And who could ever forget the dreadful animal cruelty? So that is their rap sheet, and they're the big target we're going after in our own way. And it's very kind of you to call us an organization, because it's it's just us. We're just private individuals.
Well, it's interesting when we talk about the number of change makers and the type of change makers, right, in the world today. You have individuals, you've got organizations, nonprofits, and businesses, and companies, and agencies, and government, and at the, you know, the national, as well as down all the way down to the local. But it does take so many different types of organizations working together. You can't attack it from one angle. You know, there's no silver bullet, right, to solve everything.
Yes, no, I agree. It's a broad church. Everybody is welcome, from the most benign activist who sits at home writing letters to the editor, or someone like the RSPCA in some countries, or the Royal Society for pretending to care for animals, right to the crazy guy who is brave and goes out to Antarctica and rams a Japanese whaler. You know, they're all welcome. There's a place for them all. It's a broad church.
Exactly. There's something for everybody. I always tell people, share, share, share. You know, everybody has the ability to share. And I know you mentioned 500 projects, and, you know, not only for the animals, but for the environment, for younger people. I say younger because I'm 51, so the younger generation, you know, and for medical needs. And in a sense, your group is an incubator program in a way to develop, help to develop younger organizations into effective change makers. Can you tell us more about those type of projects?
Of course. Because we have so many projects, I put them all into silos, if you like. For example, we have, let's just say, the Kindness Streets program, where we take dogs off the streets in India, for example, in a dog catching vans, take them back to a shelter for 3 days, where they're spayed and neutered and given anti-rabies injections, and 3 days later are released back on the same street corner. thereby maintaining the same carrying capacity for whatever food is on the street. And over time, the dog population will reduce. And in the process, in many cities, we've reduced the incidence of rabies, particularly on kids, to 0. So that's the Kindness Streets program. And attached to that, we noticed some time ago that there were poor people living in the streets, sleeping under a tree or a shop awning, and they would beg for food at night, during the day, and at night would sleep under the tree with a couple of dogs for company and for security. And the food that they begged for, they'd share with the animal. So we signed a contract with a restaurant, and at lunchtime, the restaurant prepares a meal. It's a large mound of rice on a banana leaf. On top of it is poured a vegetarian curry, and with a kind of soup called rasam. It's then wrapped up in the banana leaf and in newspaper to keep it hot, plus whatever fruit is in season: apple, pear, banana, or peach, and a bottle of water, a sachet. And our vehicle goes down, picks up the food, and goes down to a street corner, and these poor people come around, and we hand them out. If you go to the internet, you'll see me handing it out to the poor folks. And we've been doing that for a long time. And we tell the folks, don't treat this as charity. Just imagine it as a stipend. So if you see a dog's given birth to puppies, or someone is whipping a horse, or a lorry's hit a cow, go into any shop, they let you use the phone, call our shelter, we'll send an ambulance to pick up the animal. And of course, they're very happy to do that. We started with one of those in Vishaka, in Andhra Pradesh, in India, on the Bay of Bengal, run by a brilliant man named Pradeep Nath. And the plan, of course, is to have, I think we've got 6 or 7 right now. My long-term plan is to have 100 and brand them like Starbucks. So when I die, some local Indian guy or guys can take it over and run it. And contiguous with that, we, VSPCA acquired large acreages of land on which we have dug several bore wells, got about 2,000 animals, which are buffaloes, cows, camels, emus, dogs, cats, you name it. It's a Garden of Eden. Built several brand new shelters, a dispensary, a little pond for the buffaloes to sleep in, to play in, and planted about 50,000 trees. On each one of these properties, we have a biogas plant, which takes the cow dung and converts it into the slurry into biogas. The shelters are now 100% self-sufficient in cooking gas, and to a large degree self-sufficient in electricity. And the slurry is such a powerful thing, we're using it as fertilizer to grow fruit, nuts, vegetables, and flowers. It's a wonderful project. So, and we call that silo is called Kindness Farms. And of course, now we've got Kindness Skies. One I think you're obliquely referring to is called Kindness House. We had a building, it's a very large one, about 40,000 square feet, very close to the city, about 800 yards from the Parliament, in the most exciting, bohemian, energized pocket of Melbourne, highly veganized, with vegan restaurants, vegan shops, bookshops, very interesting people. And we owned all the shops on the ground floor, almost the whole block. And upstairs, we had a large number, 45 serviced offices. And we had 350 very smart young people in the building. 85% of the people who were in the building paid nothing. We paid all the bills, no rent, rates, taxes, insurance, electricity, cleaning. We had boardrooms, training rooms, kitchens, showers, meeting rooms, high-speed internet, security guards. Upstairs, we had kitchens, a movie theater. Once a month, we'd have a dinner for 100 people free of charge and show a film about veganism, world peace, animal rights, refugees, good important things like that. So that's called Kindness House. So that gives you a flavor. It was an incubator where people came to us who had been working off a kitchen table. And we have for 25 years. But soon, one little organization, Beyond Zero Emission, came with only 2 people. And I don't know how many how far it is, but they're all around the world now. I think they've probably got maybe 200 people in their network. The Brothers of St. Lawrence came in there. They only had 5 people, and a few months later, they won a $14 million contract to clean a huge government building. We had Lawyers for Animals, Sea Shepherd, Greenpeace, the United Nations, social firms, Artists for Kids, the Wilderness Society, Australians for Dolphins. A really very powerful, it was the creme de la creme, if you like, of the social justice movement. And if you had to pick the best in the country, you'd pick them. So that's it was wonderful because they didn't have any bills to pay apart from their own. They could come to work, they had nice offices, it's air conditioned, it's heated, they had all the facilities that a modern office has, and they had boardrooms that they could invite clients into. So that was a real success story. Sorry, I'm probably giving you too much information.
No, that was no, please, that was amazing. And you know, this whole talk is about the business of kindness. And there are a lot of different businesses out there. Obviously, like I said, as I was mentioning earlier, are on plantbasedentrepreneurs.com, and we try to help businesses, but you know, there are some businesses that will, in essence, try to maintain or keep their empire, so to speak, right, their territory. And you know, obviously for-profits, there's a bit of competition there. But even within the nonprofits and other organizations, there can be some territorial pieces that you wonder why aren't we all working towards the same goal? You know, what's the secret, do you think, or what are your insights into how to get more businesses and organizations working together?
Ron, you make a very good point. Now, this movement, you know, I came in as a clean skin. I didn't know anybody, and I didn't really want to get involved with the politics or the minutiae and their little petty squabbles that they had. I wanted to be above it all, to be a resource they could call on if they needed it, but I didn't want to get involved. But I conclude that we've become highly balkanized, and it's to our own detriment. I spend a lot of my time nowadays in boardrooms of big companies and in the meat and dairy industry, for example, or talking to people from the fishing industry, the timber industry, and the bankers who support those industries. And I have to tell you that regardless of what certain activists will tell you, these people are not scared of us. They're not scared of us. In fact, one particular CEO said, Phil, we call that movement the easy beats. You're so balkanized. The Easy Beats, you're too young to remember this, used to be a very famous band in the old days when I was young. Very fine band, I must tell you. So we call you the Easy Beats. And it's about time. I'm not suggesting we should all get together and sing Kumbaya. In fact, in diversity, there's a lot of strength. We need to understand that we need to have a Gleich's chaos theory, you know, where everyone's flying in different directions, but they know when, like a flock of birds, to fly together to confuse their prey. And that's a mantra I've been trying to teach to the animal rights and animal protection movement all around the world, with very, very limited success, I got to tell you, and try to keep them in to understand strategos. It comes from the Latin words, the art of the general, the art of war. Trying to do that is like herding cats. Very difficult to do. But in Kindness House, we had a very unusual, lots of unusual things happening. Let me give you an example. There are 2 organizations who, for some reason, which we all know about, just didn't get along and were constantly at each other's throats, Sea Shepherd and Greenpeace. Well, what do? I bring them both into the building. Okay, and within 3 months, Sea Shepherd guys are picking up the mail for the Greenpeace guys and vice versa. If Sea Shepherd had stuff that had to be carried up to their offices and there was no one to help them, the Greenpeace guy would walk up and give them a hand and carry it in. We had 2 very important clauses in our so-called lease agreement with all these so-called tenants. Not really tenants, they're just people who happen to be there. And the first one was, if you eat animals in my building, I kick you out. And 2, if you have a dog and you don't bring him to the office, I kick you out. But there was a 3rd clause I wanted to put in, I believe in zero population growth. I think we've got too many human beings on this goddamn planet, and I want to keep the population as low as human population as low as possible. And I found that all these very young, smart, highly energetic, very brilliant young people, the place was full of PhDs and hard-nosed activists. They started dating and getting married and having kids, and which goes right contrary to what my plan was. So I decided I was going to put a clause in the agreement that said, no hanky-panky, no fraternization amongst the people in Kindness House, because I didn't want them to have any kids. So I spoke to the lawyers, and the lawyer said, Phil, I'm afraid you can't do that. It's against the law.
So there was there's a little limit there, and there's a barrier to love. You can't stop love.
I wanted to supervise all this stuff, and it turned out I couldn't do it, and very disappointing, I got to tell you.
Well, I give you credit for everything else. you couldn't stop love, but all right, I get it. Now, you had a global view, and in terms of your projects, we know that world hunger is one of the things you know, the relationship between animal agriculture and world hunger is a big deal. We want to hear more of your thoughts. I've got some ideas on this as well. I'd like to have some other questions from this, but what are your thoughts in terms of the relationship?
Ron, just sort of step to stage, just think about it this way, if I may.
Yes.
In human history, only 100 billion human beings have ever lived. 7.5 billion people are alive today. And we human beings torture and kill 2 billion sentient, living, loving animals every week. We stab and suffocate 1 billion ocean animals every 8 hours. If human beings were killed at the same rate, we'd be wiped out in 1 weekend. Trillions of fish are ground up into pellets to feed to livestock. Vegetarian cows are now the world's largest ocean predators. And now the oceans are dying in our time. This generation will see all our fisheries are dead. And they are the lungs and the arteries of the earth. Now you'd know that oceans sequester more CO2 than all the forests of the world put together. Now 10,000 entire species are wiped out every year because of the actions of one species. And we now face the 6th mass extinction in cosmological history. If any other organism did this, a biologist would call it a bloody virus. It is a crime of unimaginable proportions. So with that in mind, it's just not fair that one mammalian, reptilian, biped, who just happens to have an opposable tongue, has been able to wreak such havoc on an unsuspecting planet. Our days are numbered, and I've written extensively on this particular subject. So I think we've now sort of reached a crossroads. We've either got to, as we say in Australia, and you can edit this out, it's time to piss or get off the pot.
No edits needed for that. No edits needed for that.
I'm ever so grateful. So I don't know how it's all going to pan out, but I made a very conscious decision. I was going to do all I possibly could to help in some small way, just to alleviate the suffering at the choke points as I saw them, and they all seem to start and end with animal agriculture. I think if you just think about it this way too, there are 2 peak predators on this planet: orcas in the oceans and human beings on land. In the 20th century, human beings, us, killed 200 million members of our own species. Orcas killed none of their own species. And we shouldn't expect any protection from our own governments either. In the 20th century, 100 million people have been killed by their own governments. I think it was Victor Hugo said that there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. But I say there is nothing more destructive than a bad idea whose time has passed. The time for meat has passed, if it ever existed in the first place. So I think one of the first steps is, I don't think we could ever go piecemeal and shut down individual industries, but we can do more than that. We can go after them individually, but we've got to do other things as well. I spoke in the European Parliament and also spoke in the Israeli Knesset Parliament in Jerusalem. I gave a speech in the Parliament in The Hague and also in the Parliament of World Religions in Melbourne. And this is basically what I said. The most beautiful word ever written at any time, in any country, in any language in human history, came from India, from the Upanishads 3,000 years ago. Ahimsa, non-violence to any living being. Now, it's a beautiful word, not because it describes our nationality, our politics, our religion, our diet, or our lifestyle, but because it describes our character. Ahimsa describes our character. It says we reject all forms of violence wherever it occurs, in our homes, our streets, our hearts, and at our dining tables. So really, all this is not just about animal rights. It's also about human wrongs. So animal rights is now the greatest social justice issue since the abolition of slavery. Now, I know slavery was abolished, but it still exists through around 30 million slaves extant today. But at least there are laws against it. So this notion about rights for other animals is a powerful one. In fact, it's a revolutionary event, more powerful than the Industrial Revolution, the Reformation, or anything ever conceived by Galileo, Copernicus, Einstein, Darwin, or Freud. Because it protects the most precious of all things, life. So the growing vegan movement, the plant-based movement, is on the right side of history, because you guys are creating the new enlightenment and bringing in the second Renaissance. Now that is a war worth fighting for.
Is it a war that has enough allies in all countries? Because you mentioned a number of countries that you've spoken in, right? And you know, some countries we know have a bigger stake in terms of animal agriculture. What's your feeling in terms of the movement as you speak in these countries? What's the growth, or you know, do you feel like things are turning on a global scale?
Ron, the movement in different countries, to use the old term, is like a curate's egg, good in parts. There are some countries that are doing well and some that are not. But I often say that, particularly when we talk about war and strategy, because I'm ultimately a strategist in the corporate world, the enemy, our enemy, so to speak, is just an unpersuaded friend. He hasn't really come to grips with what we're trying to do. But when the penny drops, he'll accept it. When I talk to big corporations, the mistake that many activists make is believing that everyone in a boardroom is a money-grubbing, greedy bastard. And they may have all those qualities. Yes, that could be true. But they're also very intelligent. They didn't get to those positions being stupid. So if you present an idea, a proposition to them in an intelligent, coherent, meaningful way that could also show that it manages their risks, They're all ears, and they will listen respectfully. They may not agree with everything you say or with your timetable, but they will leave the table with something else added to their perspective. So if there is any fault in the mechanism that's being used, a lot of it depends on us. And that's why I think I've had, if I may say so, a high degree of success in certain places because of the way in which I've presented information. So I keep, I'm hopeful. And to get to the nub of your question, talking about the numbers, the head count of the opposition, I think it was Margaret Mead who said, never doubt that a few committed people can change the world. Indeed, that is the only thing that ever has. And she's absolutely correct. There are only 13 million Jews in the world. But look at the number of the Nobel Prizes they win every year, like clockwork. And they play such a vital role in international affairs and the arts and music and literature. My wife and I sat in the Olympic Stadium a few years ago, full of pride, as Australia, a tiny country with a population less than Florida, won more medals than every country in the world, with the exception of the United States and Russia. Tibet's population is only 3 million. But who hasn't heard of the plight of the Tibetan? But there are over 600 million vegetarians and vegans in the world. And that is bigger than the United States, England, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, all of them put together. If they were one nation, they would be bigger than the 27 nations of the European Union. They're bigger than OPEC. And despite this massive demographic footprint, they are still drowned out by the raucous hunt and shoot and kill and cretins who believe that violence is the answer when it should not even be a question. So if we have right on our side, we've got a rap sheet against these people so extensive. If we have nature working in our favor, why are we still losing? We need a better class of activists. Doesn't mean we jettison what we've got, we just attract a better breed. Now, I frequently attend some boardroom meetings to give talks to CEOs, etc. And I make I'm always looking for information. And they give me more information in these meetings than they realize. I often ask them how they got into their positions. What were their academic backgrounds? How ambitious were they when they were young? Did their parents encourage them? Was it sheer luck that they chose one particular industry, whether it is chemicals or aviation aerospace or investment banking or steel making or anything? And I found some very interesting, consistent threads. They were ambitious, they were committed, they were very healthy. Many of them were magna cum laude. They topped their classes in law school or in engineering school or med school. They were very, very ambitious, hardworking, driven people. And I respect that. I was full of admiration for these people. And some of them were very young. And I always make a note of their names and their ages and the schools they went to, and I make notes. And then I went through I have many thousands of people in my database of people I've known since I've been doing this for 30 years. I quit my investment banking when I was 40 years on my 40th birthday.
Oh, wow.
And I looked around my network around the world, and I said to myself, how many, I'm sorry, I did ask one CEO of a very large bank, how many of your guys would like to go and run an NGO? And there were no takers. And I looked around my group and I asked, how many of these guys have the intellectual bandwidth, the horsepower, if you like, to run a big institution? And I've been thinking about studying that subject for all these years. and there's only one, who I can pull out of an NGO right now, and within 2 years, he could run an enterprise with a headcount of 500,000 people. He's that good. I won't tell you his
But
name,
only one.
but it's only one.
So we need a better class of activists.
Yeah.
Change, and I used to call this change makers versus change leaders. Like change makers, and whether it's business or nonprofits or government, change makers, yeah, they want to make change. Change leaders want to create change makers.
Perfect.
Right. And so I was training change leaders as I built global training and education programs around the world, around marketing technology, now around health, wellness, and creating change, right? Social justice issues. That's why the Plant-Based Network is one of the projects. But it's that point of, as you said, it's not even just a better class of activists, it's a better class of leaders in activism.
Great.
And the connecting, and again, this lack of experience, if you will, there's been, and we can debate, right? People will say, well, is it because the people that are going into activism don't have the experience? They have the passion, but they don't have the marketing experience to compete against marketing of the animal agriculture industry, for instance, or they don't have the leadership skills. They don't have that Fortune 500 leader that's going from that, running an enterprise organization into activism. So we're already suffering. We're already at a disadvantage in the plant-based movement or the vegan movement when competing against organizations and industry in general. How do we rectify that?
We will always be a whole bunch of fringe dwellers snipping at the tails of big industries until we mobilize, work together, share our resources, accept the fact that none of us is as smart as all of us. Ron, Rudyard Kipling said, the world is crying out today for only two things: leadership and the truth. We just need to tell the truth. That is what the Sanskrit word satyagraha means. When we say we speak the truth, we've got to speak the truth forcefully. And in Sanskrit, satyagraha means the truth force. I don't know if you've heard of a guy named Brandon Kennelly. He wrote a thing called the Book of Judas. He said, if you want to serve your age, betray it. But what does that mean, to betray your age? It means expose its lies, humiliate its conceits, debunk its arrogance, and condemn them to face harsher truths. That is serving your age, but it takes courage. Alvin Toffler said that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that is what I'm trying to get across to people. It's time for you guys to unlearn the old tired paradigms that we know no longer work. We need to be smarter.
One of the things that I've been involved with my whole life is technology. Always loved technology. So IT was my field before I became an activist in my own way, then marketing. But that connection between people and marketing, the idea of connection and getting people connected together, like in IT, right? Network, we have computers that connect together. But much like you said, of us mobilizing together, that connection seems to be, as well as much technology as we have connecting each other together and being able to, like in this case, right, connect through Zoom, for instance. There's so much available to us now that we didn't have before, yet we are also so much more disconnected. And I think part of that disconnected point is some of the discord that we have. We end up shutting off and creating barriers. between us and the person next to us, especially here in the US, lots of discourse right now. So how do we reconnect people? How do we get businesses and entrepreneurs and I call it a trifecta, right? You have communities, local communities, people, individuals. Then you have government agencies and organizations, city, to national and federal, and then to businesses. So if you can have individuals, the community, the businesses, and other organizations working together, it seems like we could do more. But again, that connection, it seems like we're lacking the connection. I'm trying to figure out how do we, even like I said, for a lot of what I do is based on trying to get the message out to connect people through a media outlet, right? For us, but for you, what has been successful? What has been successful in connecting organizations together?
Right. I gave a speech on Saturday night in Berlin I did the laudation for Maneka Gandhi, and after it was over, Maneka and a couple of others asked some questions. Excuse me. And one of the things that came out was we shouldn't go into an organization and try to change the organization. We should try to find one particular person who is ripe to catch the message, to catch the fire. And once that person within the organization who has the credibility, the gravitas, the influence gets the message, that person will make a change. Now, I remember giving a tutorial to a very, very brilliant young man who's now a captain of, well, not just a captain, but he's running a significant amount of the Sea Shepherd business. And when we only had one ship at the time, and we try to build the fleet one ship at a time. And we've done, I think it's now 14 ships on every ocean and every sea. I said to him, think about it like you're a merchant banker, investment banker. How would you want to grow your enterprise? Well, you could do it three ways. One, you can do it organically. Spend money in your company and grow it slowly, and you have a big organization. The second one is you make a takeover bid. You take over another company and merge the two. And now you're bigger. That's wonderful. But a really smart way of handling it, a different way, and it's a less risky way, is to bond. So you can build something, you can buy something. The third way is you bond. And you wouldn't believe it, this young man is so brilliant. That's exactly what he's been doing for the last 6 or 7 years. And he's been taking Sea Shepherd and bonding, not with other NGOs, but with national governments, signing memoranda of understanding with maybe 7 or 8 countries who put their navies or their fisheries department or their coast guards on Sea Shepherd ships, and they're fully armed. And Sea Shepherd goes out to sea and arrests, using their technology and their crew and their food and their logistics, using the sovereign laws of those countries to arrest poachers who are illegally fishing in those countries' waters. So far, I think over 60 ships have been arrested, captains charged, tens of millions of euros have been extracted in fines, some ships scuttled, and that's done through bonding. That's what I've been trying to get across to people within this movement. You don't have to grow big. You don't have to merge with another NGO. You need to bond with each other. There'll be lots of differences, but find areas in which you have strong commonality and work hard on that particular case. I'll give you an example. At Kindness House, we had all these NGOs, and they all had different agendas. But whenever one of them had a gig or a party or a fundraiser, you'd find all of them showing up. You'd have a Sea Shepherd function and you'd have some Greenpeace guy showing up, or vice versa. It was a remarkable experience. It was a lot easier here in Melbourne, I must confess. It's hard to transplant to Sydney, for example. But in India, it's very, very difficult. The United States, it's very, very difficult, I agree. But because it's difficult doesn't mean it's impossible. So I think it's a kind of foolishness. I don't know if you remember the speech I made. If you haven't, read a book by a remarkable American historian. Her name is Barbara Tuchman, beautiful woman. And she defines folly, foolishness, as acting against our own best interests. That's folly. And if you might recall, Occam's razor, named after the 14th century Jesuit priest, he said that when you're presented with a number of possible solutions to a problem, the simplest one is the best. So we should be going into big corporations and to government and to other instrumentalities and saying things like, let's apply this to the meat and dairy industry or the timber industry or the fishing industry. Forest depletion alone costs the global community 3 times as much as the global financial crisis, 3 times, and it happens every year, and nobody notices. Zoonotic diseases, we've just going through one, COVID-19, but ones like SARS, mad cow, avian flu, now the COVIDs, coming from caged animals, threatens a pandemic to rival the Black Death, which wiped out half of Europe. The World Bank said that one small influenza pandemic alone would cost the global community $3 trillion. And the CDC says we've got 100 coming at us. And of course, milk and dairy is killing us with cancers, heart disease, hypertension, and diabetes, the whole lot. And Harvard says that 1/3 of all early deaths can be prevented by not eating meat. And of course, Medicare and bad diets has now bankrupted the once powerful United States. They would need $8 trillion invested in treasury bills just to pay the interest, and they got precisely 0. They could shut down every school, university, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Homeland Security, FBI, and CIA, and they still will not be able to fund it. And that TV debate that I was on, Get Animals Off the Menu, has now got some 60 million views and been translated into 20-odd languages independently. And Oxford University says that if the world followed that and went vegan, it would save $30 trillion in health and environmental damage alone. Just that one thing. And of course, these antibiotic resistances that we're all getting nowadays is proving to be so dangerous to us. It will kill 10 million people per annum by 2050. That's about 10 million per annum. And it'll cost the global financial community $100 trillion a year. That is 60 times as much as the whole world spends on aircraft carriers, destroyers, missiles, bombs, planes, guns, and spies. That's just from antibiotic resistance. This is Mad Hatter economics on steroids. And you know, when particularly in India, I noticed that this much more than I had in the past. Now the United States is feeling it too. But on water, we've got to get this message across to the activists as well. Water is the new oil. Nations will soon be going to war over it. Underground aquifers that took millions of years to fill are now running dry. I drilled my first bore well when I was a teenage Boy Scouter, and we struck sweet water at 80 feet. Today I'm building an orphanage nearby, and we're at 800 feet and we're sucking mud. And in China, we're at 3,000 feet and the drill head is still dry. And remember, the Chinese are the world's best hydrologists, the best. People here, you know, in Australia, I'm sure, because when it comes to this sort of thing, we're extraordinarily backward. If 10 jumbo jets crashed every day, we'd be horrified if there were no survivors. Well, the same number of children die every day from water-related diseases. You know this, the Colorado, the Rio Grande, the Indus, the Yellow Rivers, now frequently no longer reach the sea, sucked dry by the meat and dairy industry, whilst 4 billion people suffer from water scarcity. And why do I even mention water? Because it takes 15,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of beef, 1,000 liters of water to produce 1 liter of milk, and a dairyman makes 28 cents a liter for it. What a preposterously stupid industry. 1 billion people today, 1 billion people today are hungry. 20 million people will die this year from malnutrition. Cutting meat by only 10% will feed 100 million people, and going vegan will end malnutrition forever. And it's costing me a lot more money nowadays for food because food prices are increasing rapidly. It used to cost me $197 a ton for Thai rice for my projects in Southeast Asia, $197. And then it went up to 1,015, a 5-fold increase in 5 months. And poor countries sell their grain to the West, while their own children starve in their arms, and the West feeds it to livestock. So we can eat a steak? I bet I'm not the only one who thinks that is a bloody crime. Believe me, every morsel of meat we eat is slapping the tear-stained face of a hungry child. When I look into a rice, do I remain silent? If everyone ate a Western diet, we'd need 2 planet Earths to feed us. We've only got one, and she's dying. So the Earth can produce enough food for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. And that's the food issue. We can talk about greenhouse gas emissions, and I can show you how dangerous the world looks. Not this Christmas, by next Christmas, how much more dangerous it's going to be then than it is now.
That fast.
That fast. Not this coming Christmas, by the following Christmas. Unless something radical is going to happen. We already know, it's been well publicized, greenhouse gas emissions from livestock now vastly exceed those of transport. Cars, trains, buses, ships, lorries. Livestock's infinitely worse. I don't know if you've ever been to the Yamal Peninsula in Russia, but if you get the chance to go, you should go. It will terrify you. You see, the melting Siberian permafrost is now a ticking time bomb. When it releases its sequestered gas, this game is over. It's finished. I go to India. We've got 55 projects in India, so we go there every year for 5 weeks, and we go from right at the top, from Chandigarh all the way down to Mysore. The Himalayan ice fields are correctly called the third pole, like the North Pole and the South Pole, because they irrigate half the world's population through the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Yellow River, the Mekong, the Irrawaddy. And these glaciers are melting fast. You have no idea what damage it's doing to the roads, to the bridges, to your electricities, to water supplies, malaria. It is massive in a nation with 1.3 billion people. I gave a speech, 2,000 wealthy Indian entrepreneurs in the Rajiv Gandhi Center in New Delhi, and including Amartya Sen, who's my hero. He got the Nobel Prize from Cambridge. He was sitting in the front row, and I was terrified to give a speech in his presence. And I gave him these numbers. Pardon me.
Sure, grab a drink.
Yeah, and I spoke to Muhammad Yunus, and he just got the Nobel Prize, the Peace Prize. And I told him that all the good that he had done with Grameen Bank would vanish when Bangladesh drowns. To say nothing about Manila, Mumbai, Calcutta, Ho Chi Minh City, Bangkok. And then I started to run, well, I might have mentioned some of the other choke points. To say nothing, of course, about New York, Miami, Shanghai, Sydney, Singapore, Tokyo, Jakarta, 10 million people in Jakarta. Jakarta is sinking a foot a year, 1 foot a year, the whole city. And Jakarta is a very sophisticated country. Rotterdam, Venice, Hong Kong, New Orleans, Karachi. And these are just some of the cities that are going to be in. Look at Mexico. I was in Mexico 3 years ago. Mexico City is a basket case. All the buildings are bent. See what's going to happen to their train system, their roads, their freeways. And I also presented these same numbers to Al Gore when we had dinner in Melbourne 4 or 5 years ago. And more recently, I gave a speech for Dr. Peter Doherty, Australia's Nobel Prize winner in medicine. And there were no arguments at all from these brilliant men. None, they all agree. But lots of arguments from the grubby, vile, squalid meat and dairy lobby. So I guess Upton Sinclair was right. It's impossible to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. Now, I'm sorry I'm talking too much, but I'll just throw it out and you can edit it properly. The American guy, Admiral Denny McGinn, he was the chief of, he's retired, he was the chief of US warfighting requirements. And he said, we have learned that nations will raid and invade long before they starve. And he's right. Now, we in Australia and the United States, you guys are just as bad. We freak out in the West when 1,000 refugees arrive on our shores. Just imagine greenhouse gas emissions hitting 500 parts per million, or a 3-degree temperature rise, creating a minimum of 100 million eco-refugees. This calamity will reshape the geopolitical landscape forever. We're facing the perfect storm. If any nation had developed weapons that could wreak such havoc on the planet, we would launch a preemptive military strike and bomb it back into the Bronze Age. But we can't, because it is not a rogue state. It's an industry. The good news is we don't have to bomb it. We can just stop buying it. It's an industry.
Obviously, your research and your talks have inspired and motivated so many people. How can people find out more about you? How can they get more involved?
Don't have to get involved with me. I'm just one person here. There's so much information. Let them do their own stuff. I'm willing to help in whatever way I can. I'm no big deal. I'm just a low-key one person. As one Australian Prime Minister described Australia, the arse end of the earth. We're all that's where we are. But to be serious, I've got a couple of Facebooks. Write to me, tell me where I'm wrong. If you've got something interesting, that an article or research paper you think I should read, please send it to me. But we've got to get off this meat and dairy drug as soon as possible. It is a filthy, vile. It's a trade defended only by the most profoundly obtuse and ignoble cretins on the planet. It has no place in civilized society. You know, Ron, we need a new form of jurisprudence, a new system of laws. We need it's called a foro conscientiae, a court of the conscience. That's what we need. I'm speaking of the law, I'm sort of reminded of the last words of Judge White. I don't know if I remember it properly, but something like this. The law is humanity's first attempt at decency. So I just ask everybody to join us in a battle, in a war that decency cannot afford to lose, because in the end, only 3 things matter: how deeply you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things that were not meant for you. Meat was not meant for you.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it really is that simple. I hope everyone would take it seriously, because this is our last and best chance of surviving, if indeed we deserve to survive. But I'm an eternal optimist. I live in hope, and we just go back to work the next day and do the best we can.
press forward. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you. And I know everyone watching this is going to figure, including myself, will be looking for the solutions to the issues you brought up here. And my hope is that we can gather and bond together, as you said.
Attaboy.